The schoolhouse bell hung silent in the dusty afternoon as Ellie Blackwood crouched behind Widow Jensen's chicken coop, clutching a horse blanket around her trembling shoulders. Her cheeks burned hotter than the Texas sun as the McGregor boys' laughter echoed from the direction of town. In her 3 months teaching at Silver Creek, she'd faced rattlesnakes in her desk drawer and drunks stumbling into class, but nothing had prepared her for this. Standing half-naked and desperate while those privileged sons of the mayor made off with every stitch she owned. A lone horseman appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the merciless sky. Ellie shrank deeper into the shadows. Would this stranger be her salvation or another tormentor? The question hung in the air like the promise of rain that never came. Jedediah Tucker reined in his palomino at the sight of movement behind Mabel Jensen's chicken coop. 3 years ranching in isolation had sharpened his instincts. Something wasn't right. His weathered hand moved to the colt at his hip, then stopped when he caught a glimpse of terrified eyes peering at him from behind the weathered boards. "Show yourself," he called, voice rough from disuse. "I mean no harm." The chickens scattered, clucking indignantly as a woman emerged from behind the coop. She clutched a filthy horse blanket around herself like armor, her dark hair falling loose around shoulders that tried to stand proud despite her circumstances. Her eyes held no tears, only a fury that could have set the prairie ablaze. "Please help me, cowboy," she said, her voice steady despite her situation. "They stole my clothes." Her words didn't break or plead. They demanded, as though even in this state she expected to be heard. Jedediah averted his gaze, a courtesy that seemed to surprise her. Without a word, he shrugged off his duster, holding it toward her with his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Name's Jedediah Tucker," he said. "Miss?" "Blackwood. Ellie Blackwood." She took the coat with hands that barely trembled now, slipping it on with swift, economical movements. "I teach at the schoolhouse." The heavy canvas swallowed her small frame, but dignity returned to her posture immediately. She stood taller now, though the hem of the duster dragged in the dirt. "The McGregor boys," she continued, tightening the coat around her. "They followed me to the swimming hole where the ladies bathe. I thought it was safe, private." Her jaw tightened. "They took everything. Dress, petticoats, shoes, even my grandmother's cameo." Jedediah's face hardened. He knew of the McGregor boys, privileged sons of the mayor, whose pranks grew crueler each year their father's wealth protected them from consequences. "You aim to report this to Sheriff Watkins?" he asked. A bitter laugh escaped her. "The sheriff takes his orders from Mayor McGregor, same as everyone in this town." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. "I need my clothes back, Mr. Tucker. I need them back today, or I'll have no choice but to leave on tomorrow's stage. A schoolteacher can't survive scandal, deserved or not." The wind kicked up, rattling the chicken coop and carrying the distant sounds of the town's bustle. Dust devils danced across the yard, and somewhere a door slammed. Jedediah studied this woman standing before him in his coat, asking for help he wasn't sure he could give. 3 years he'd kept to himself since burying his wife, avoiding town and its complications. Now this woman stood before him, trouble written all over her circumstances. "Those boys ride back to town?" he finally asked. "Yes, laughing like hyenas." Her hands tightened on the coat's collar. "They said they'd hang my unmentionables from the schoolhouse bell." The words hung between them. More than clothes had been stolen today. This was about humiliation, about running a woman out of town for daring to swim on a hot day. "My ranch is closer than town," he said, after a long moment. My late wife's clothes are still there. After you're decent, we'll see about getting yours back." Something flashed across her face, surprise, maybe gratitude, before she masked it with determination. "Thank you," she said simply. He extended his hand toward her, decision made. The gesture felt foreign after so long without human contact, but she took his calloused palm without hesitation. As he helped her onto his horse, the schoolteacher leaned down, her voice low and hard as iron. "When we find them, Mr. Tucker, I want to be the one who faces them. This isn't just about clothes. It's about whether I can stay in Silver Creek at all." Jedediah nodded, understanding more than she knew. Some battles had to be fought face to face, no matter the cost. He'd avoided his own for 3 years, hiding away on his ranch with only ghosts for company. "Yes, ma'am," he said, leading the horse toward his property. "Your fight is yours to finish. I'm just providing the means." But as they left Widow Jensen's property, Jedediah couldn't help glancing toward town, where the McGregor boys waited. He'd sworn to avoid Silver Creek and its memories, yet here he was, being pulled back by a schoolteacher's stolen dignity. By sundown, he'd be breaking his vow of isolation, and Lord knew what would come of it. Silver Creek's main street stretched before them like a dare. Jedediah hadn't come to town in months, and now he rode straight down its center with the schoolteacher perched behind him, swimming in his dead wife's calico dress and clutching his waist like she might fall. Every eye turned to watch them pass. They'd stopped at his ranch just long enough for Ellie to dress, a simple blue calico that hung loose on her frame. Sarah had been a bigger woman. Jedediah had turned away when Ellie emerged from the bedroom, the sight of another woman in his wife's clothes hitting him harder than expected. "I'm sorry," she'd said softly, noticing his stiffness. He'd only nodded, unable to speak. Now, as they rode into town, the whispers followed them like shadows. Jedediah felt Ellie's grip tighten around his waist as the murmurs grew. News traveled faster than horses in Silver Creek. They'd already heard something. Ahead, the white steeple of the church rose beside the small schoolhouse where Ellie taught. As they approached, his jaw tightened. Women's undergarments hung from the schoolhouse bell rope, fluttering like obscene flags in the afternoon breeze. A small crowd had gathered, some laughing, some looking away in embarrassment. Among them stood Reverend Thaddeus Palmer, his face a mask of righteous disapproval. "Oh, dear God," Ellie whispered, her breath warm against Jedediah's shoulder. He helped her down, feeling her trembling return. But when she faced the crowd, her back was ramrod straight, her chin high. The whispers grew as they recognized the schoolteacher in borrowed clothes. "Miss Blackwood," Reverend Palmer called, approaching with measured steps. "We've been looking for you." His eyes took in her oversized dress, her damp hair, then flicked to Jedediah. "I see you found assistance." The insinuation hung in the air like smoke. Before Ellie could respond, a woman's voice cut through the murmurs. "Someone should take those down immediately." The mayor's wife stood apart from the crowd, her face tight with displeasure. "This is a disgrace to our town." But nobody moved. Jedediah saw the calculation in their eyes, weighing the mayor's influence against common decency. Before he could step forward, Ellie marched toward the schoolhouse steps. "I'll do it myself," she said, each word precise as a blade. Her borrowed boots echoed on the wooden steps. And the too big calico dragged slightly, but she moved with as much dignity as any queen. "Miss Blackwood," Reverend Palmer called after her, "perhaps you should consider whether this incident indicates God's disapproval of a young, unmarried woman in a position of authority over impressionable children." Ellie froze on the steps, her back to the crowd. Jedediah saw the tremor pass through her shoulders. "That's enough, Reverend," he said, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Unless you're suggesting the Almighty takes sides with common thieves who'd strip a woman of her dignity." The Reverend's face reddened, but before he could respond, laughter erupted from the saloon across the street. The McGregor boys emerged, Jason and Luke, whiskey glasses in hand despite the early hour. They stopped short at the sight of Ellie on the schoolhouse steps. "Well, if it ain't our schoolmarm," Jason called, nudging his brother. "Found yourself some clothes, I see." He grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth, "though they don't fit you no better than what the good Lord gave you." The crowd's reaction split, some nervous laughter, some uncomfortable shifting. Ellie's hands curled into fists at her sides. She turned slowly to face the brothers, her voice steady. "Return my belongings, Mr. McGregor. All of them, now." Luke McGregor clutched his chest in mock innocence. "Why, Miss Blackwood? Are you accusing us of something? Maybe you should be more careful where you decide to go swimming. Anyone might happen by." Sheriff Tom Watkins pushed through the crowd, his weathered face set in careful neutrality. His eyes took in the scene, the clothes hanging from the bell, Ellie in her borrowed dress, the McGregor boys smirking, and Jedediah Tucker standing like a storm cloud, ready to break. "That's enough spectacle for one day," he announced, adjusting his gun belt. He turned to the crowd. "Go on about your business, folks. Ain't nothing to see here." Nobody moved. The sheriff sighed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Miss Blackwood, why don't you come down to my office and file a proper complaint?" Jason McGregor's smirk widened. "Complaint about what, Sheriff?" "Far as I recall, my brother and I just went fishing at the creek. Ain't that right, Luke?" "Sure enough," Luke drawled. "Caught nothing but disappointment." More snickers from the crowd. Jedediah watched Ellie's shoulders stiffen further, if that were possible. He'd seen cornered animals with less fight in their eyes. "That's quite enough, boys." Martha McGregor stepped forward, her voice sharp as a whip. To everyone's surprise, she climbed the steps and began taking down the garments herself. "Miss Blackwood is owed an apology, at the very least." The brothers' smiles faltered at their mother's unexpected intervention. Jedediah noticed how Martha's hands trembled slightly as she carefully folded each item, her face a mask of controlled fury. "I'm so sorry, my dear," she said quietly to Ellie. "This isn't right." "Nevertheless, Mrs. McGregor," Reverend Palmer interjected, "there is the matter of propriety. A young woman bathing outdoors, regardless of how private she believed the location to be." "You implying she invited this, Reverend?" Jedediah asked, his hand moving unconsciously toward his holster. The preacher drew himself up, but Martha McGregor cut him off. "Reverend Palmer, I myself have bathed at that spot, as have most of the women in this town, when the creek runs low and carrying water gets tiresome. It's been a ladies' bathing spot for years." She handed the folded garments to Ellie. "Your other things, your dress and shoes and such, where are they, boys?" The McGregor brothers exchanged glances. "Don't know what you mean, Mother," Luke said, examining his fingernails. Jedediah stepped forward, one hand resting casually near his holster. "I think you boys might want to search your memories a bit harder." Sheriff Watkins moved between them, hands raised. "Now hold on. We don't need this turning ugly. Luke, Jason, if you've got the lady's things, best produce them now." "Don't have them," Jason said with a shrug. "Maybe she left them at the swimming hole. Maybe they got carried downstream." "I don't believe you," Ellie said, clutching the bundle of undergarments to her chest. The distant sound of a wagon approaching drew everyone's attention. Mayor Hezekiah McGregor's rig rolled down the main street, the man himself sitting tall at the reins. The crowd parted as he pulled up before the schoolhouse. Unlike his sons, there was nothing sloppy about Hezekiah. Every inch of him spoke of control, from his neatly trimmed beard to his immaculate suit. "What's all this commotion?" he called, his voice carrying the authority of wealth. "Martha." "Boys?" He climbed down and mounted the schoolhouse steps. Martha's posture stiffened at her husband's approach. She handed Ellie the last of the undergarments. "Our sons have been behaving abominably, Hezekiah," she said, her voice tight but steady. "They stole Miss Blackwood's clothing while she bathed and left her stranded." The mayor's eyes narrowed as they moved from his wife to his sons, then to Ellie, and finally to Jedediah. Recognition flickered in his gaze. "Tucker, isn't it? Didn't expect to see you in town." His tone cooled noticeably. "Getting involved in town affairs again?" "Just helping a lady in distress, Mayor," Jedediah replied evenly, though his jaw tightened at the man's tone. McGregor turned to Ellie. "Miss Blackwood, I'm sure my boys meant no real harm. High spirits, you understand." He pulled out his wallet. "Let me compensate you for any lost items. We'll consider the matter closed." Ellie stared at the offered money, her face flushing. "This isn't about compensation, Mayor McGregor. It's about respect." She clutched the bundle of recovered garments. "And I still don't have my dress, my shoes, or my grandmother's cameo." The mayor's smile tightened. "Boys, do you have the lady's other belongings?" The brothers exchanged glances. Luke kicked at the dirt. "We might have stashed them somewhere, as a joke." "We can get them back. Tomorrow, maybe," Jason added with a lazy grin. "Today," Jedediah said. "Now." The mayor's eyes hardened at Jedediah's interruption. "I believe I'm handling this, Mr. Tucker. My sons will return your property, Miss Blackwood, and I assure you they'll be appropriately disciplined." He turned to the lingering crowd. "The show's over, folks. Miss Blackwood has had a trying day and deserves some privacy." As the crowd began to disperse, the mayor leaned closer to Ellie. "I trust we can put this unfortunate incident behind us. The school board meets next week. I'd hate for this misunderstanding to color their evaluation of your position." Widow Jensen's kitchen was warm and smelled of fresh bread, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in Ellie's bones despite the afternoon heat. She sat at the worn table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, still wearing Sarah Tucker's oversized calico. Her own clothes, what had been recovered, lay wrapped in brown paper beside her. "You drink that coffee, child," Mabel Jensen instructed, bustling around her small kitchen. "Nothing settles the nerves like strong coffee and a little sugar." The older woman slammed a cast-iron skillet onto the stove with unnecessary force. "Those McGregor boys been asking for a switching since they was knee-high to grasshoppers. Their mama used to have the handle on them, but since the mayor got elected—" She shook her head, gray curls bouncing. Jedediah stood by the window, watching the street with the vigilance of a man who expected trouble. Yet he hadn't wanted to leave Ellie alone, not with the mayor's thinly veiled threat hanging over her. "I should go back to the schoolhouse," Ellie said, setting down her cup. "I have lessons to prepare for tomorrow." "You're not going anywhere till those boys bring back what they took," Mabel declared, slicing bread with quick, angry strokes. "That Jason McGregor's meaner than a snake when his pride's hurt. Always has been." A knock at the door, firm and official, made them all freeze. Jedediah's hand moved to his holster as Mabel shuffled to answer. Sheriff Watkins stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Afternoon, Mabel," he nodded. "Miss Blackwood still here?" The widow stood aside to let him enter, eyeing him with suspicion. "What brings you by, Sheriff? Finally decided which side of the fence you're sitting on?" Watkins ignored the barb and set a bundle on the table, carefully wrapped. "Miss Blackwood, I've got your dress and shoes." Jason McGregor brought them to my office. Ellie unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers. Her blue dress and sensible boots lay inside, seemingly untouched. "And my cameo?" she asked, looking up hopefully. The sheriff's hesitation was answer enough. Ellie's shoulders slumped. "That was my grandmother's. The only thing I have left of her." "Said they didn't have it," the sheriff mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "Might have lost it at the creek." Jedediah watched the sheriff's face. "Those boys are lying, Tom. You know it as well as I do." Sheriff Watkins sighed, running a hand over his face. "Look, Jed, we both know how things work in this town. Mayor McGregor's got the council in his pocket. He bankrolls half the businesses on Main Street." He turned to Ellie. "Miss Blackwood, if you're smart, you'll take the clothes and let this matter drop." Ellie's chair scraped loudly as she stood. "Let it drop. So those boys can do this to the next woman who displeases them?" Her voice was low but fierce. "I came to Silver Creek to teach children that actions have consequences. What lesson am I teaching if I just let this drop?" The sheriff looked away, shame crossing his weathered features. "The school board meets on Friday. Mayor's called a special session to discuss recent events." "He wouldn't dare!" Mabel hissed like an angry cat. "The children love Miss Blackwood, parents too." "Maybe so, but McGregor can make things difficult." Watkins adjusted his hat nervously. "Just be prepared is all I'm saying." After the sheriff left, silence stretched in the kitchen. Ellie stared at her recovered clothes, the missing cameo a hole in her heart. "What will you do?" Jedediah finally asked. Ellie traced the pattern on her recovered dress, her face set with resolve. "What can I do? I've lost my grandmother's cameo, and now I might lose my position." She looked up, determination hardening her features. "But I won't let them drive me away. I'll be at that school board meeting, Mr. Tucker. I'll face them." Jedediah nodded slowly. 3 years he'd hidden from the world, nursing his grief. This woman had known him less than a day, yet stood tall, despite everything thrown at her. "You won't face them alone," he said, the word surprising him as much as her. Ellie's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Tucker, I wouldn't ask you to—" "You didn't ask," he interrupted. "Some things just need doing. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "it's about time someone stood up to Hezekiah McGregor." Mabel Jensen set a plate of bread and preserves on the table with a decisive thump. "'Bout time indeed. Eat up, both of you. Can't fight tyrants on empty stomachs." As Ellie reached for the bread, Jedediah noticed her hands were steady now. Whatever happened at that school board meeting, he suspected Silver Creek would never be the same. The schoolhouse had never felt so hostile. Rows of chairs faced the front, where the school board sat behind a table. 5 men, including Mayor McGregor at the center. Parents and townsfolk filled every seat, with more standing along the walls. Ellie sat alone in the first row, back straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. This emergency session of the Silver Creek School Board will come to order. Mayor McGregor's gavel struck once, silencing the room. We're gathered to discuss a matter of grave concern regarding the moral fitness of our schoolteacher, Miss Ellie Blackwood. The door opened at the back of the room, and heads turned as Jedediah Tucker entered. He'd shaved and wore clean clothes, but nothing could disguise the hardness of a man who worked with his hands and his gun. Without a word, he took the empty seat beside Ellie. She felt a rush of gratitude at not facing this alone. "As I was saying," the mayor continued with a pointed look at Jedediah, "this board has responsibility for ensuring our children are taught by individuals of unimpeachable character. Recent events have raised serious questions about Miss Blackwood's judgment and moral propriety. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ellie spotted the McGregor boys lounging near the back, smirking. We have reports that Miss Blackwood was observed bathing outdoors in a state of complete undress in a public area where anyone, including impressionable children, might encounter her. Reverend Palmer stood. I feel compelled to remind everyone of Proverbs 11:22. Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. He looked directly at Ellie. Our schoolteacher must be above reproach, an example to our young people of Christian virtue and modesty. Ellie rose, her voice steady despite the burning humiliation. I bathed at the spot where women in this town have always bathed, at a time when no children would be present. The only people who saw me were your sons, Mayor McGregor, who deliberately followed me there to humiliate me. That's a serious accusation against my boys, Miss Blackwood. Do you have proof? The schoolhouse door opened again, slower this time. Martha McGregor entered, walking with quiet dignity, to stand beside Ellie. A gasp went through the crowd. The mayor's face darkened. Martha, this is not the place. I believe it is exactly the place, Hezekiah. She turned to face the crowd. The swimming spot Miss Blackwood used has been used by the women of this town for generations. My mother used it. I've used it. Many of you ladies have as well. She looked directly at several women who nodded reluctantly. This isn't about propriety. It's about my son's behavior, which has gone unchecked for far too long. The mayor's face flushed with anger. Martha, you will sit down. This is not a discussion about our sons. Isn't it? Then what about Elizabeth Carson, who left town last year after Luke made similar unwelcome advances? Or Mary Turner, who quit working at the Mercantile after Jason cornered her in the storeroom? Martha's voice wavered, but held firm. How many women must leave Silver Creek before we acknowledge the problem? The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Jason McGregor pushed away from the wall, face red. Mother, what are you doing? We were just having a bit of fun. Martha didn't look at her son. Instead, she reached into her reticule and withdrew a familiar golden object that caught the lamplight. I found this in Jason's dresser drawer this morning. She handed the cameo to Ellie. I believe this belongs to you. Ellie's fingers closed around the precious heirloom, tears threatening for the first time since this ordeal began. The mayor stood, slamming his gavel. That's enough, Martha. You've embarrassed this family enough for one day. No, Hezekiah, you and our sons have embarrassed this family enough for a lifetime. I've kept silent too long. She turned to the board. Gentlemen, if you dismiss Miss Blackwood over this incident, you'll not only lose an excellent teacher, but confirm what many already believe, that justice in Silver Creek is whatever Hezekiah McGregor decides it should be. Sheriff, the mayor's voice was tight with fury, please escort my wife home. She's clearly unwell. Sheriff Watkins shifted uncomfortably, but didn't move. Jedediah Tucker stood, positioning himself beside Martha and Ellie. I'd like to speak, he said quietly. This isn't your concern, Tucker, the mayor snapped. When I find a woman stranded without her clothes, terrorized by two grown men who should know better, it becomes my concern. His voice carried to every corner of the room. This town was different when I lived here with my wife. People looked out for each other. They stood against bullies, no matter how rich those bullies might be. The mayor's smile turned vicious. Is that so? Well, let me remind everyone who this man is. Jedediah Tucker, who retreated to his ranch after his wife died because the town doctor was too busy tending to my prize bull to answer his call. a man who blamed everyone but himself for being unable to save her. He leaned forward. "Tell me, Tucker, how does it feel to stand beside another woman wearing your dead wife's clothes?" The schoolhouse fell into horrified silence as the mayor's cruel words hung in the air. Jedediah stood frozen, color draining from his face. Ellie stared at Mayor McGregor in disbelief, one hand instinctively reaching toward Jedediah. "Hezekiah, how dare you?" Martha's voice cut through the silence. The mayor ignored his wife, his eyes fixed on Jedediah with calculated malice. "Everyone knows you blamed Dr. Wilson for Sarah's death. But the truth is, no doctor could have saved her. You just needed someone to blame besides yourself." Jedediah's hand trembled near his holster. For a terrible moment, the schoolhouse held its collective breath, waiting for violence to erupt. But instead of drawing his weapon, Jedediah's hand fell to his side. "You're right about one thing, McGregor," he said, his voice steady despite the pain etched on his face. "I did blame others, the doctor, God, myself." He drew a deep breath. "But Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. And she sure as hell wouldn't have wanted me to stand by while another woman was wronged." He turned to face the crowded room. "Folks, I've been a ghost in this town for 3 years. Didn't want to see anyone. Didn't want to be reminded of what I lost. But yesterday I saw something that pulled me back to the living. I saw courage." He nodded toward Ellie. "Miss Blackwood could have run, could have taken the stage out of town. Nobody would have blamed her. Instead, she's standing here, fighting for her good name and her right to be treated with dignity." A small figure pushed through the adults. 10-year-old Emma Wilson, the doctor's daughter, ran to stand beside Ellie, her braids bouncing. "Miss Blackwood is the best teacher we ever had," the child declared, glaring at the school board. "She doesn't just make us memorize things, she explains why they matter." Emma lifted her chin defiantly. "And she stood up to Billy Thompson when he was pulling my braids, even though his pa's on the town council." The crowd chuckled, breaking some of the tension. Dr. Wilson stood, clearing his throat. "If I may speak?" He approached the front, nodding respectfully to Jedediah. "Mr. Tucker, I've owed you an apology for 3 years. The mayor did call me away to his ranch that night, but I should have insisted your wife's condition was more urgent. I've regretted that decision every day since." He turned to face the board. "As for Miss Blackwood's character, I can think of no finer example for our children. When little Joey Marshall broke his arm, she stayed with him for hours while I set it, distracting him with stories so he wouldn't fear the pain. That's the measure of this woman, not where she chooses to bathe." One by one, parents rose to defend Ellie, mothers who appreciated her patience, fathers impressed by their children's progress. Even old Samuel Green, who had initially opposed hiring a fancy Eastern girl as teacher, stood with difficulty on his wooden leg. "My grandson couldn't read a lick before Miss Blackwood came," the old man said gruffly. "Now he reads me the newspaper every evening. That means something." Martha McGregor stepped forward again, her voice stronger now. "I move that this board dismiss these baseless concerns about Miss Blackwood's character and instead address the real problem, my son's behavior and the culture that has allowed it." The McGregor boys pushed toward the door. "Hold it right there, boys," Jedediah called. They froze, caught between fleeing and facing the music. Sheriff Watkins moved to block the door, his decision finally made. "Reckon it's time we all heard the truth, straight from those who were there," the sheriff said, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. The mayor stood, slamming his gavel. "This meeting is over. As head of this board, I declare these proceedings invalid." "I don't think so, Hezekiah," Martha said, turning to the board members. "Gentlemen, Will you let one man, even the mayor, dictate justice in this town, or will you hear all the evidence before making your decision?" The school board members exchanged glances. Finally, Herbert Williams, the oldest member, spoke up. "Mayor McGregor, we were elected to serve this community, not just you. I believe we should hear everyone out." The mayor's face contorted with fury, but he was outnumbered. He sank back into his chair, knuckles white around the gavel. Jedediah felt something brush his hand. Ellie had moved beside him, her fingers briefly touching his in silent support. The gesture, small as it was, steadied him. "Let's hear the truth," Herbert Williams said, adjusting his spectacles. "Jason and Luke McGregor, step forward." The brothers exchanged glances, trapped between the sheriff at the door and the expectant crowd. Reluctantly, they shuffled to the front, standing before the board table like schoolboys caught stealing apples. "Did you follow Miss Blackwood to the swimming hole yesterday?" Williams asked directly. Luke studied his boots. Jason glared defiance. "We were just fishing." "Answer the question," Sheriff Watkins cut in. "Simple yes or no." "Yes," Luke muttered. "But we didn't mean—" "And did you take her clothing, leaving her stranded?" Williams continued. "It was just a joke," Jason protested. "Everyone's acting like we committed murder or something." "Is theft a joke, Jason?" Martha asked, her voice tight. "Is humiliation something to laugh about? What if it had been your sister left stranded that way?" "We don't have a sister," Luke said sullenly. "No, but you had victims before Miss Blackwood," Dr. Wilson spoke up. "My nurse Alice quit last spring. She wouldn't say why, but I saw her crying after you two came by the office. And my niece refused to come back to town after your attention at the harvest dance," Samuel Green added, leaning on his cane. As if a dam had broken, stories began to pour forth, women harassed, girls made uncomfortable, all incidents that had gone unreported for fear of crossing the mayor. Mayor McGregor's face darkened with each new accusation. "This is absurd." "Boys will be boys, and half these women probably encourage the attention." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Martha's face went white. "Boys will be boys?" Ellie stepped forward, her grandmother's cameo now pinned at her throat. "Is that what you taught them, Mayor? That women exist for their amusement? That there are no consequences for cruelty?" She turned to the crowd. "What lesson are we teaching the children of Silver Creek when we excuse such behavior?" Jedediah noticed a shift in the room, people standing straighter, eyes clearing as if waking from a long sleep. The mayor must have felt it too, because he changed tactics. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his tone softening to false concern, "nobody denies you've been an adequate teacher, but this town has standards of propriety that must be maintained, perhaps in Boston. I came to Silver Creek because I believed in what this town could be," Ellie interrupted. "A place where education matters. Where children learn not just reading and figures, but right from wrong." Her voice rang clear through the schoolroom. "If we teach them that power excuses cruelty, what kind of citizens are we raising?" The mayor slammed his fist on the table. "Enough. This meeting was called to evaluate Miss Blackwood's conduct, not my son's." "Perhaps they cannot be separated," Herbert Williams suggested mildly. "If Miss Blackwood was targeted because she enforces rules equally for all students, including your sons, then her conduct and theirs are indeed connected." "I won't stand for this." Mayor McGregor rose, face purple with rage. "I've built this town. Without my money, half the businesses on Main Street would collapse." "Is that a threat, Hezekiah?" Martha asked quietly. "It's reality," he snapped. "And you do well to remember which side your bread is buttered on, all of you." He glared at the board members. "Especially those of you with outstanding loans at my bank." A heavy silence fell. Jedediah watched the calculation in people's eyes, measuring principle against prosperity. He'd seen this before. Good people cowed by wealth's power. His hand found Ellie's, squeezing gently. "There are some things money can't buy, Mayor," he said, voice carrying in the quiet room. "Decency, respect, a town where women can walk without fear of your sons." "And what would you know about running a town, Tucker?" the mayor sneered. "You who couldn't even save your own wife?" Instead of the desired effect, the cruel words seemed to strengthen Jedediah. "I couldn't save Sarah. That's true, but I can stand here today and help save something else, this town's soul." He addressed the board directly. "Gentlemen, you have a choice. Stand with a bully who uses his money as a weapon, or stand for what's right. It's that simple." Martha McGregor approached the board table. "My husband has controlled this town long enough. I have here," she placed a leather-bound ledger before them, "records of every loan called in as punishment, every business pressured when someone crossed him. Read it, then decide if this is the man you want determining what justice means in Silver Creek." The mayor lunged for the book. "That's private." Sheriff Watkins stepped forward, hand on his holster. "Sit down, Hezekiah." For a terrible moment it seemed the mayor might defy him. Then, recognizing the shifted power in the room, he slowly sank back into his chair. "This meeting will adjourn for 15 minutes while the board reviews this evidence," Herbert Williams announced. "Miss Blackwood, Mrs. McGregor, Mr. Tucker, thank you for your courage. The rest of you, please remain seated." As the board members withdrew to the small office behind the classroom, Jedediah watched the McGregor boys fidgeting under the sheriff's watchful eye. Whatever happened next, Silver Creek had already changed. The question was whether that change would last beyond tonight. The schoolhouse hummed with tension as the board members filed back in, faces solemn. Herbert Williams carried Martha's ledger, which he placed carefully on the table. The crowd quieted immediately. "This board has reviewed the evidence before us," Williams began, his voice steady. "We've also consulted the town charter regarding our authority in such matters." Mayor McGregor sat rigid in his chair, knuckles white where they gripped the armrests. His sons had been moved to chairs directly before the board table, the sheriff standing watchfully behind them. "First, regarding Miss Blackwood's position," Williams continued, "we find no cause whatsoever for dismissal or disciplinary action. On the contrary, the testimony of parents and students affirms her exceptional service to this community." A relieved murmur swept through the crowd. Ellie's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her face remained composed. "Second, regarding the conduct of Jason and Luke McGregor," Williams adjusted his spectacles, "we find clear evidence of harassment, theft, and behavior unbecoming citizens of Silver Creek." "You have no authority," the mayor began, but Williams raised his hand. "The town charter grants this board authority over all matters pertaining to the schoolhouse and the moral education of our children. As these young men's actions directly impacted our teacher, and by extension our school, we are well within our rights." He turned to the brothers. "Jason and Luke McGregor, you will make a public apology to Miss Blackwood. Additionally, you will perform 30 days of community service, repairing the schoolhouse roof, chopping wood for winter, and any other tasks Miss Blackwood deems appropriate." "This is outrageous," Mayor McGregor exploded. "My sons won't be treated like common criminals." "No," Reverend Palmer spoke unexpectedly. "They'll be treated like men who need to learn respect for others. As Scripture teaches, For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. The mayor's head whipped toward the preacher. You too, Thaddeus? I was wrong earlier, the Reverend admitted. I judged Miss Blackwood harshly while overlooking the true sin before us: pride, cruelty, disrespect for God's children. He squared his shoulders. I will not make that mistake again. Herbert Williams cleared his throat. Finally, regarding Mayor McGregor's conduct as revealed in this ledger, "That's private family business," the mayor interjected. "Not when it affects the whole town," Williams countered. "We cannot legally remove you from office before next election, but this board unanimously calls for your resignation." Gasps rippled through the schoolhouse. No one had ever publicly challenged Hezekiah McGregor's authority so directly. "You'll regret this," the mayor snarled, rising from his chair. "Every one of you with loans, with businesses depending on my goodwill. You'll see what happens when you cross Hezekiah McGregor." "No, Hezekiah," Martha's voice cut through his threats. "They won't regret it because your days of financial bullying are over." She faced the crowd. "My husband's money came from my father's estate, an estate that, according to his will, I control should my husband prove unworthy of its management." The mayor's face drained of color. "Martha, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that as of tomorrow, I'll be reviewing all outstanding loans with the bank manager. No one who stood up for what's right tonight will suffer for it." She turned to her husband, voice softening slightly. "You built this town, Hezekiah, but somewhere along the way you forgot why we came here: to create something good, something worthy of passing on to our children." For the first time, the mayor seemed at a loss. He stared at his wife as if seeing her anew. Herbert Williams broke the silence. "Jason and Luke McGregor, please stand and address Miss Blackwood." The brothers rose reluctantly. Luke spoke first, eyes on his boots. "Sorry, Miss Blackwood. It was wrong what we did." Jason remained silent until his mother touched his arm. "Sorry," he muttered. "Not good enough," Sheriff Watkins said from behind them. "Tell her exactly what you're sorry for." Luke swallowed. "We're sorry for following you to the swimming hole, for taking your clothes, and for hanging your undergarments from the bell. It wasn't funny. It was cruel." Jason nodded stiffly, adding nothing. Ellie regarded them steadily. "I accept your apology. And I'll expect you both at the schoolhouse tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock to begin your service." Mayor McGregor grabbed his hat. "This isn't over," he said, voice low with fury. He stormed toward the door, pausing only to glare at Jedediah. "Especially for you, Tucker." The door slammed behind him, leaving a strange mixture of tension and relief in his wake. Herbert Williams smiled slightly. "This meeting is adjourned. Miss Blackwood, you have a classroom to prepare for tomorrow, I believe." As the crowd began to disperse, Martha approached Ellie. "I hope you'll forgive me for not speaking sooner. I've been a coward for too long." "You spoke when it mattered most," Ellie replied, clasping the older woman's hand. "That's what counts." Morning sunlight streamed through the schoolhouse windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. Ellie stood at the blackboard, chalk in hand, as her students filed in. They seemed unusually quiet, exchanging glances as they took their seats. The school bell rang its familiar call, bronze voice carrying across the town. Ellie touched her grandmother's cameo at her throat, drawing strength from its familiar weight. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood," they chorused, eyes wide and curious. "Before we begin our lessons today, I want to introduce our new helpers." She gestured to the back of the room, where Jason and Luke McGregor stood awkwardly, each holding a broom. "Mr. Jason and Mr. Luke will be assisting us with repairs and cleaning for the next month." The children turned to stare at the brothers, who shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "Now, let's review yesterday's arithmetic," Ellie continued smoothly, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Emma, would you please recite the multiplication table for 7? As Emma began her recitation, Ellie noticed a small vase of wildflowers on her desk that hadn't been there before. A folded note beside it read simply, "Thank you for your courage. The Mothers of Silver Creek." Outside, the McGregor boys' sullen sweeping provided a rhythmic backdrop to the morning lessons. Whenever they slowed, Sheriff Watkins, seated in a chair tilted against the schoolhouse wall, would clear his throat meaningfully. At midday break, as the children spilled into the yard with their lunch pails, Dr. Wilson appeared at the doorway. "Miss Blackwood," he said, hat in hand, "the town council met this morning. Martha McGregor has been appointed acting mayor until the next election." Ellie's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That was swift." "Hezekiah left town on the morning stage," the doctor explained. "Took only a valise. Martha thinks he's gone to stay with his brother in Dallas for a while." He hesitated. "She's already been to the bank. All foreclosures are suspended pending review." "A lot can change in a day," Ellie murmured. "The right kind of courage tends to spread," Dr. Wilson replied with a small smile. "By the way, Martha asked if you might consider taking rooms with her. That big house is too empty now, she says." Ellie glanced toward Widow Jensen's cottage, visible through the schoolhouse window. "That's very kind, but Mabel has been good to me. I wouldn't want to abandon her." "Actually," the doctor looked slightly embarrassed, "Mabel's taking Martha's spare room. Says she's tired of rattling around alone and figures Martha could use some plain-speaking company." A laugh bubbled up from Ellie's chest, the first genuine one in days. The sound surprised her with its lightness. After the doctor left, Ellie watched her students playing in the yard. The McGregor boys had moved to the roof, hammering loose shingles under the sheriff's watchful eye. The rhythmic pounding seemed to mark time like a heartbeat, steady, purposeful, moving forward. When the children returned for afternoon lessons, little Tommy Hughes approached her desk with something clutched in his small fist. "Miss Blackwood," he said solemnly, "my ma says to give you this." He opened his hand to reveal a small silver thimble. "She says every lady needs one, and hers kept her going when times was hard." Ellie accepted the humble gift with the gravity it deserved. "Please thank your mother, Tommy. I'll treasure it." As the afternoon sun began its western slide, Ellie dismissed her class. The children scattered like leaves in the wind, their voices carrying on the autumn air. She remained at her desk, organizing papers and preparing the next day's lessons. The sound of boots on the schoolhouse steps made her look up. Jedediah Tucker stood in the doorway, hat in hand. He'd shaved again, and his clothes were clean. 3 years of isolation had marked his face with lines of solitude, but something had changed in his eyes. A darkness lifted, if not completely gone. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his deep voice quiet in the empty schoolroom. "Mr. Tucker." She smiled, setting down her pen. "I'd hoped you might stop by." He took a few steps into the room, looking around at the children's drawings pinned to the walls, the neat rows of desks, the blackboard with tomorrow's lessons already written out in Ellie's careful hand. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small wooden carving on her desk, a tiny schoolhouse with a bell tower, each detail rendered with painstaking care. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her finger over the miniature bell. "I thought—" he hesitated. "I thought maybe we could walk to Widow Jensen's together." I hear she's moving out, and you might need help with her heavier things." Ellie stood, gathering her papers. "I'd like that, Mr. Tucker." "Jedediah," he corrected gently. "After what we've been through, seems right you should use my name." She nodded, pinning her grandmother's cameo securely at her throat. Ellie, then. Together they walked out into the late afternoon sun. The schoolhouse bell caught the golden light, the same bell that had displayed her humiliation now standing as a symbol of justice served. As they descended the steps, their shadows stretched long behind them, touching at the edges, separate but connected. Folks still talk about that autumn in Silver Creek when a schoolteacher's stolen dignity changed our town forever. When I was a boy, my grandfather would sit me on his knee and tell the tale as twilight settled over our porch, his voice dropping to that special tone reserved for stories that mattered. "Some battles ain't fought with guns," he'd say, "but with the quiet courage of standing your ground when it'd be easier to run." Then he'd point toward the old schoolhouse where Miss Blackwood, or Mrs. Tucker, as she became, taught 3 generations of Silver Creek children. What happened back in '83 wasn't just about stolen clothes or public humiliation. It was about a town finding its backbone after years of bending to one man's will. Hezekiah McGregor had built Silver Creek with his father-in-law's money, true enough. But Martha McGregor saved it with her courage. When I was 12, I interviewed Martha for a school project. She was in her 70s then, white-haired but straight-backed, sitting in that parlor where she'd once been little more than decorative. "People ask if I was scared to stand against my husband," she told me, pouring tea from a silver pot. "Of course I was. But there comes a time when staying silent costs more than speaking up." The McGregor boys took different paths after that public reckoning. Luke left town for a while, then returned humbled, eventually taking over the bank and running it with a fairness his father never showed. Jason had a harder road, pride's a stubborn companion, but even he found redemption working cattle on the Tucker Ranch, where hard work and straight dealing were the only currency that mattered. Reverend Palmer preached until his dying day, but his sermons changed after that school board meeting. "Man looks on the outward appearance," he'd quote, "but the Lord looks on the heart." His daughter told me he kept a small wooden bell on his desk as a reminder that righteous judgment begins with oneself. As for Ellie and Jedediah, their story became the stuff of local legend. Watching them walk down Main Street, her hand tucked in the crook of his arm, you'd see something that went beyond mere affection. They'd both known what it meant to stand alone against cruelty, her with her stolen dignity, him with his buried grief. In finding each other, they'd found something worth defending together. The schoolhouse still stands, though the bell's been silent for decades. If you run your hand along the old wooden desks, you might find carvings from children long grown, initials, crude hearts, and small renditions of bells, a symbol that took root in our town's imagination. Sheriff Watkins kept that chair outside the schoolhouse long after the McGregor boys finished their service, claiming it was a fine spot to keep an eye on things. In truth, I think he needed that daily reminder of what happens when good men find their courage too late. Better late than never, though. That's another lesson from the tale. What I've come to understand, as Silver Creek's unofficial historian, is that communities aren't shaped by buildings or businesses, but by moments when ordinary people decide what kind of place they want to live in, when they choose together to stand for something. That's why I still carry my grandmother's thimble, yes, I'm Tommy Hughes's grandson, as a reminder that the smallest things can sustain us when times are hard, and why, each evening, I place my boots neatly by the door beside my wife's smaller ones. Some rituals carry meaning beyond words, Some courage gets passed down without ever needing to be named. Dignity, once found, becomes a legacy that outlasts us all.